My name is Laura Ellis. I work for Louisville Public Media. I'm the director of podcasts, and we are all gathered here tonight for a taping of the very first episode of a brand new podcast about Jewish life in Kentucky called the Bluegrass Shmooze. Thank you. This show is part of our podcast incubator at Louisville Public Media. That is a project that's designed to amplify untold stories and conversations from our community. We support podcast creators of marginalized identities to tell and to own their own stories. So this is our third podcast to come out of that initiative. Before we get started, I want to thank Knesset Israel for hosting this event. Including Executive Director Yonatan Yusman for all of his help today. Thank you. The Jewish Heritage Fund for supporting the show. The Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials for supporting our entire podcast incubator project. Thanks to Eric Matthews for running sound tonight. Rachel Perkins for coordinating this whole shebang. Heaven Hill for the bourbon. Stevie for tending bar, and Chef John for the delicious nosh. Speaking of the nosh, please stick around after the recording because the nosh will be magically transformed to dessert nosh. Before we get started, I'm going to invite you to take out your phones if you have them on you. Not just to silence them. I know you think I'm going to say silence them, and I am going to say silence them. But first, you can go to bluegrassshmooze.org and subscribe to our podcast so that when we premiere on September 8th, you will get it immediately. While you do that, I'm going to also let you know that you have some index cards and markers kind of strewn throughout the seating area here. As we go through, if questions occur to you, just write them on the card and hold the card up in the air, and one of us will come and take them away and spirit them up to the stage, and someone will ask them on your behalf. If you don't see a card or a marker, just raise your hand and I'll bring you one. Because we want you to be part of this conversation too. That's not typical in podcasting. Usually it's a one-way conversation, but we'll do things a little different tonight. I'm going to introduce our podcast creators next. Rabbi Shani, I can't talk on this thing. Shani Abramowitz and Rabbi Ben Fried. I have known them for a couple months now, and I've already learned so much from them. I really cannot wait to launch this podcast so our whole Kentucky community gets to learn from them too and hear what they have to say. Many of you know Rabbi Fried because he is your rabbi here at KI. But for those he does need to be introduced to, he grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but he is a fourth-generation native Texan. He does say y'all as part of his natural conversation. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where he also earned an MA in Jewish thought. He's been here at KI for 2 years, and this is a big one. He will be making his minor league baseball debut this Sunday night, throwing out the first pitch at the Louisville Bats game. He has been practicing. Rabbi Shani Abramowitz was born and raised in Chicago and was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, where she also earned a master's degree in Hebrew Bible and its interpretation. She's now rabbi of Have Zion Synagogue in Lexington, where she's been for 2 years. Shout out Lexington. We have at least one person from Lexington. And she's a published poet. Her latest project is a collection of poetry inspired by the Mishnah, the earliest rabbinic text. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Shani.
Thank you so much, Laura, for those beautiful introductions. And thank you to the LPM team for not only making this podcast possible, but for making this evening possible. And especially a thank you to all of you for being here, for making the time, giving up some of your precious evening to be here, and also to our 2 wonderful guests. We're going to have a wonderful, spirited conversation, and this is going to be part of the very first episode of the Bluegrass Shmooze. I'm going to take this out of here, if that's okay. Maybe not. And our first episode is going to debut on September 8th, so hopefully you've all already subscribed. And we're so honored to have you here to participate, really, in this live recording of our first episode. And I just want to also say thank you to my dear friend and colleague, Ben Fried, Rabbi Ben Fried. It was a gift to go to rabbinical school together and get to know each other that way, but what a tremendous privilege and gift it has been to land in the Bluegrass and land in the Commonwealth, something that maybe we both didn't expect would happen. But we are so thrilled to be here, both in Louisville and in Lexington, and to be on this journey together, so thank you. I'm going to introduce Mayor Craig Greenberg. Mayor Craig Greenberg was sworn in as Louisville's 51st mayor on January 2nd, 2023. Craig is a proud Louisvillian, husband, father, entrepreneur, and community leader who believes in thinking big, working hard, and making things happen. A graduate of Jefferson County Public Schools, the University of Michigan, and Harvard Law School, Craig was an attorney before helping launch and lead 21C Museum Hotels, a Louisville-based company which grew to more than 1,100 team members across the country. He is now the co-owner of locally based Ohio Valley Wrestling. Craig has been married to his wife Rachel for 21 years, and they have 2 sons, Daniel and Benjamin. Welcome.
Great to be with you all this evening.
Awesome. And here we have Jerry Abramson. Before I get to Jerry, are there any Jewish wrestlers in Ohio Valley Wrestling?
In Ohio Valley Wrestling, no, but there are. Goldberg is
Well,
a huge former WWE wrestler. So
We'll see if we can get him here for a special event.
that's right. That's right.
All right. Jerry Abramson currently holds the position of executive in residence at Spalding University, with responsibilities for developing and directing new Institute for Local State Government Leadership, which will train elected and appointed officials throughout Kentucky. As many of you probably know, Jerry served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of Intergovernmental Affairs from November 2014 to January 2017. In this role, he oversaw the Obama administration's domestic agenda with state, city, county, and tribal elected officials across the country. He also served as Lieutenant Governor of Kentucky alongside Governor Steve Beshear. And prior to entering state government, as I'm quite sure all of you know, Jerry held the role of longest-serving mayor of Louisville with 21 years of service, earning the nickname Mayor for Life. During his time as mayor, Jerry was president of the United States Conference of Mayors, and in addition played a leadership role in the successful consolidation of the city and Jefferson County governments. Jerry received his bachelor's degree in business economics and public policy from Indiana University, and his JD from Georgetown University Law Center, where he was the editor of the center's law journal. So we are so thrilled to have you tonight with us, Jerry, Mayor and Mayor for Life. Amazing to have you all both here together on this bima, where, if I'm not mistaken, you probably celebrated your bar mitzvah downtown.
Right.
But you were up here.
That is correct. I'm very big.
Let's jump in. Mayor Greenberg, we'll start with you, and Mayor Abramson, you can answer the question afterwards. So, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs in Skokie. Ooh. Any Skokietes here? And I grew up in a huge Jewish community. And so much so that I actually didn't know people who weren't Jewish until I went to college. I mean, I knew, but didn't have deep relationships with people who lived outside of my immediate Jewish community. And so the first question for the evening is if you could just share a little bit about what it was like to grow up here in Louisville, what it was like to grow up in a place like Kentucky that has a smaller Jewish community, and how that shaped who you are today.
Sure, well thanks, and it's great to be here, and it is wonderful and a bit surreal to be with someone who I've looked up to my entire life. Really, we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, but it's almost like growing up in Louisville Jewish. When I was growing up in the 80s, my family, my parents who are here, Ruth and Ron, we moved to Louisville in 1980 from New York. And so growing up in the 80s here was almost like I had 2 different lives. I had my school life and I had my friends from school, none of whom were Jewish, and then I had my Jewish friends. We were very active. My family was very active here in KI. I went to Hebrew school, went to Sunday school, and was in high school was very involved in BBYO as well. And so I had really close friends, and still to this day, one of my closest friends is somebody who I know from growing up here at KI, Dan Roth, who many of you all know. Still to this day, we are incredibly close. So it was almost like living 2 different worlds, because there were not many Jewish people in my school. But I loved it. It really shaped a lot about who I was. I certainly was proud to be Jewish growing up. I'm proud to be Jewish now. And whether it was the religious influence or probably more the cultural and social influences on me, that still certainly shapes myself, and it's a big part of was a big part of my family's life growing up, and still is to this day.
And I'm just curious, because one of the times, because I grew up in Ann Arbor, where I also had mostly, school friends and Jewish friends, and one of the times that those intersected was actually at my bar mitzvah, because that was when you invited all your school friends into the synagogue, and it was this foreign experience for them. Was what was their reaction to that for you? Did they tease you about it? Were they impressed? How did they feel about coming in here?
All non-Jewish kids love going to bar mitzvahs. I mean, most of them say that they want to convert so that they can have a bar or bat mitzvah. And I still heard that with my kids as they went through their bar and mitzvah experiences. So that still is definitely the case. It was always a good time. And then in high school, of course, once people started driving and things, some of our friends from each other's schools started mixing and still have relationships with friends of friends to this day.
Awesome. Mayor, how did Mayor? I'm just going to call you Craig and Jerry. We're schmoozing. We're up here. It's okay.
Shani,
Ben. It's all good. What was your life like growing up here? Did you have that same kind of divide, or maybe a generation before, was it a little bit different?
Yeah, it was a little bit different. 1960s, when Craig says he went to school and there weren't many Jewish kids. When I went to school in the 1960s at Seneca High School, there were lots of Jewish kids. Lots of Jewish kids. And the AZA BBG chapters at the Jewish Community Center were the reason for us to exist, literally. We did everything after school at the center. We had friends, acquaintances. I played in the marching band. You knew people like that. You knew kids in class. I debated in the high school on the debate team, but our friends, the people we dated, the guys we hung out with, the events that we attended, were all around the Jewish Community Center and all around this neighborhood for the most part, which was very Jewish. We could have a minyan over on Winston where you live without any problem whatsoever. So it was much more focused on the Jewish experience. And for me, when I went to college, it was just the opposite. Then, although I pledged ZBT, and which was a Jewish, at the time, all Jewish fraternity, the school brought, we had, 2,000 Jews out of 40,000 Jews in college. And so then I probably made a lot more friends outside the Jewish community than I did here.
And how did you decide that you wanted to be mayor? And did your Judaism play any role in that?
Well, as you go through the experience of Hebrew school, which I'm sure we both always really enjoyed, love the great
highlights of our week.
Everyone loves Hebrew school. For those non-Jewish listeners, it's like every Jewish kid just loves Hebrew school.
Yeah. Tongue in both cheeks. But the focus of the concept of Tikkun Olam. I was involved in a lot of things with B'nai B'rith. I was president of the local B'nai B'rith chapter. I was active in the Jewish Federation. And constantly we were trying to make the world a better place. We were trying to bring about positive changes in our community, in our state, and in our country and world. And so that played a role. Mm-hmm. What played a role for me, ultimately, making the decision I wanted to go into public service was my senior year of college, was the presidential primary in the state of Indiana that Robert Kennedy ran for president. And I was the chairman of the Students for Kennedy throughout the state. And I took everything pass-fail, and I traveled with him around the state and introduced him at Notre Dame and Evansville College and Franklin and Purdue, etc. And so through him and through the discussions I had with him and through the vision that he painted about making the world a better place, I decided, once I didn't get into Yale Law School, that I would go to Washington, get into the best school I could get into, and see if public service could ultimately be something I could have an opportunity to serve.
Well, I can see you chomping at the bit on this one, Craig.
Well, I also, there was somebody who, I think, inspired me to get involved in politics, just like Jerry was talking about. The difference for me is that individual happens to be sitting right next to me. And it was, I mean, this is a true story that I did not share until, I shared it with Jerry, but I did not share it publicly until on my inauguration on January 2nd of this day, when I publicly shared this story, that in my 8th grade Hebrew school class, Rabbi Miles, Jerry's brother-in-law, was my teacher, who's here with us tonight. Hello, Rabbi. We took a field trip. In our 8th grade was an optional Hebrew school year for us, and so it was a small class, and we went on a field trip to then the new mayor's of Louisville's office. And so we went down to see Mayor Abramson, and really that visit truly inspired me. And Jerry's enthusiasm, his energy, his creativity, his love for Louisville, a city that I was still young but really starting to fall in love with, and everything that he stood for, and it really was an inspiration to me to think about not just a life of public service, but really being mayor of Louisville. And then as I followed what Mayor Abramson was doing throughout his career, and just the pride he instilled with people to be Louisvillians, what he got done by building during his first time when there was city and county, to see what he did for the city and what he built in Louisville, seeing him lead our city through merger, and then the opportunity to continue to do that again was truly inspirational to me. And so when I came back to Louisville after being away for college and law school, I really had my sights set on following in Mayor Abramson's footsteps, and not just being mayor, but being a truly great mayor as Jerry was. And so that was what I came back to do. Then life, of course, took its crazy turns, and Rachel and I had a family, and we started 21C Museum Hotels. And so really I was loving the adventure through 21C, and I felt like we were making a positive impact, not just in Louisville with that project, but with in the other cities that we were building in. And I assumed I was going to never run for office, and I was content with that. And then again, life changes again, and my frustrations with the city after Jerry was no longer mayor started to build, and I really looked back on that inspiration and said, I'm going to go for it. And so that's part of why it is so surreal for me to be here today in KI, where we both went to synagogue. We both sat over in this section over here for many, many years together. And
for the record, the section he pointed to is the chatty section.
That is true.
Let the record reflect.
That is very true. So it's, but it truly is an honor to be mayor now, and I continue to take inspiration from Mayor Abramson's career.
I want to, Jerry, you mentioned the idea of tikkun olam, to repair the world, to build it and leave it better than we found it. I'm curious if there are other, Jewish ideas or teachings or Jewish characters even that you continue to draw inspiration and even maybe comfort from through your work.
I think it was Tip O'Neill who said, he was the Speaker of the House for many years in Washington. Pardon? From Boston. From Boston, yeah. Always talked about the importance of having a poem memorized or a saying memorized, because invariably something will happen and you won't have a speech, and you'll be somewhere and you'll need to stand up and say something. And I thought about that a lot as we were trying to especially put the city and county together and trying to create a situation where we'd be stronger together. And I use the adage of chazak, chazak, b'ni chazek, be strong, and together we strengthen each other, as an approach in a lot of settings, mostly non-Jewish settings, to try to remind folks that together we can really make it better and stronger. So I use that as a part of my have it in your back pocket, ready to roll kind of situation.
Like Jerry, I spoke a lot about tikkun olam and repairing the world on the campaign trail often. That was something that I did speak a lot about how every day in ways large and small, personally and professionally, we could each strive to make the world a better place. The other thing that I talked about a lot, which, I haven't talked about it as much, but it certainly was with me as much, was the opening line of, I can't remember if it was my Torah portion or my half Torah portion, Shoftim, but it was
Torah.
Torah, okay. Thank you. It was Tzedek, Tzedek, Tir Dov, justice, justice shall you pursue. And particularly when I started my campaign for mayor, was thinking about it in 2020, filed to run in 2021, given where we were then and where we still are as a city and as a country. Justice, justice shall you pursue is such an important lens with which I think all public officials, all people should be thinking about as they're making decisions, particularly in public life. And so that is something that I think about a lot, and certainly something that I do talk about as well.
And for the record, your bar mitzvah portion was just this past week. It's like very, apropos that we're having y'all here, at this moment. Yeah, the timing is great. So one of the things about being public figures in a place like Kentucky and being really, I think, beautifully publicly Jewish figures, that you both, you talk about Chazak, V'nit Chazek, and Tikkun Olam, and Tzedek, Tzedek, Tir Dov. When I heard you talk about that on the campaign trail, I was really proud as a local rabbi to hear you speak about your bar mitzvah on the campaign trail. Did you ever face any pushback, any either actual anti-Semitism or people who were concerned that you were being too Jewish and that kind of asked you to dial that back? Did that ever come up either while campaigning or during your time as mayor?
I was mayor a long time then. but I only had one instance.
Okay.
And it was during the first campaign in 1985. You were probably in elementary school, Rabbi.
Sure.
Giving you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I was definitely born.
I was in a neighborhood called Portland, which is a pretty rough neighborhood, and at the time was predominantly white, but it was a pretty rough neighborhood. The police officer that I worked with once I became mayor once said to me that Portland was a neighborhood that when you went into a bar and you said break it up, you needed to be ready to fight. It just wasn't going to be broken up because you happened to be a police officer. It's a rough neighborhood. Well, they had in Portland what we used to call on Bardstown Road the Bambi Walk. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Bambi Walk, but there is a Bambi restaurant where you go and have a beer, and then you walk up Bardstown Road and you have a beer at each location that you stop at, and that's called the Bambi Walk. Well, they had one in Portland. And I got to it about the 9th or 10th bar. And I walked in, the fellow who was driving me so I could jump out, etc., happened to be an African American. So we had an African American and a Jewish guy walking into a bar with people who, from a very, very rough neighborhood, who had at least 10 beers. We went out the side door very quickly, jumped in the car, and left immediately. It was reasonably unpleasant, but it's the only time it ever happened.
Wow.
And it's the only time it ever happened. I was very fortunate.
Yeah. What about you, Craig?
Unfortunately, I have had, particularly on the campaign trail, and I can't think of any incidents since being mayor, but of course I've only been mayor for a whopping 8 months now. But on the campaign
Only
trail,
20 years to go.
That's right. I'm not looking to break that record. Unfortunately, on the campaign trail, though, I did experience it, both either personally or even more so on social media these days, where it's a very different place than the real world, and what people say and what they do is certainly not pleasant often, both with words as well as with images. Everything from horns and flames and pictures of me with horns and flames behind me and money bags and every other stereotypical Jewish trope that you can think of were out there, and some bad things were said. There were certainly some actions that may or may not have been caused by anti-Semitism. But mostly though, we just ignored them. We did not engage at all, did not give anyone the time of day on that. What's worse for me, just as a parent, is my kids at school, and some anti-Semitic comments that they experienced either directly in school from other kids, or our kids play online video games these days when lots of people are playing in the same game, and some people go to your school, some people might not. So they've had some unfortunate experiences where certainly we tried to make positive learning experiences. But what I will say is my observation of not just being in public life now, but my experience here in Louisville over the past decade, is that when there is anti-Semitism that is shown, when there is hate or discrimination that is shown, particularly violent acts or vandalism type of acts, our city truly rallies together. I can think about I believe it was 2018 when there was the attack at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, and there was a community rally on the front steps of the JCC. It was not just Jewish people. It was people from all over the community that were rallying together to say, we are not going to stand for this. When mosques have been vandalized in our city, oftentimes it's Jewish leaders who are the first ones to offer, how can we help? And so to me, that's what I take inspiration in, is from knowing that the 99.9% of people in our city truly love one another, they care about one another, they do not tolerate hate, discrimination, racism, anti-Semitism of any sort. And I know that when I have spoken, I've spoken in a lot more churches than I have synagogues in my short political career, when I talk about being Jewish, and when we talk about Tikkun Olam or Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, there is truly an outpouring of support from people of other faiths, I think in part because we are people of faith, and while it might be different faiths, that is something that we have in common.
Thank you, Craig. I just want to share that this morning, apropos of what you just shared about Louisville, I was at a meeting with clergy from Lexington, interfaith clergy from Lexington, meeting with the mayor of Lexington, Linda Horton, and the same sentiment was expressed there. And there was really a sense of solidarity and love that these clergy members sort of expressed actually directly to the Jewish community. And it's really heartening to know that in places like Louisville, like Lexington, that kind of community support exists, and that it's something that we should feel really proud of. And I'm grateful to both of you for being leaders and role models in that regard.
And just one other thing is that one powerful moment, at least for me, came out of that 2018 rally on, I think that was when it was, on the JCC, which was Sadiqa Reynolds, who was then the CEO of the Louisville Urban League. She was one of the speakers that day. And she said something to the effect, far more eloquently than this, but she said something to the effect of, I am standing here with you and your community today, and I hope that you will stand with me and my community when we experience acts of racism. And I thought that was very powerful. I thought that was a very appropriate thing to say. And I continue to think about that to this day, about how it is important that we as Jewish people help others who have experienced other types of discrimination, or to really focus the efforts of government and civic action into communities that are truly where they are today because of generations of discrimination and discriminatory policies.
I wanted to ask, so as you beautifully just said, Craig, as public officials, as public servants, as rabbis, and actually as Jews in Jewish community, and particularly in smaller Jewish communities, we are sort of called to stand in the breach when something happens to our community, but to the wider community too. And I'm curious, and this is a big question, but if there's ever been an encounter, if you've ever had an encounter with someone where you were able to teach about Judaism or your particular experience of Judaism in a way that transformed a relationship or transformed a moment from maybe being potentially hateful or stereotypical or just ignorant into something that was more of a relationship of connection and understanding.
Well, one that comes to mind is really relates back to also Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. I was meeting with, this is before we really knew each other well. I was not yet mayor. It was the early part of my campaign. I was going around the city meeting with people from every neighborhood, as Jerry inspired me to do, to take 6 packs of beer to a lot of different meetings and houses and go to every neighborhood around the city. I tried to do that. I did not have a 6-pack of beer at this meeting because it was with Dr. Cosby, who is the senior pastor at St. Stephen's Church and the president of Simmons College. But I was meeting him for one of the first times I had met with him, and I was talking about Tzedek Tzedek Tir Dov. And his observation in response to that was that that is from Deuteronomy 16:19 to 20. And he was very focused at the time. This was around the time that the New York Times had published a book about 1619 and 400 years of slavery in America. And he really put a connection together between this Torah portion that I was citing as a Jewish person and the history of him and his people in America, and how it really intertwines through Deuteronomy 16:19 to 20. So our relationship flourished since then, and I really think it was that part of it is because of that moment where we uniquely bonded over something that we had in common, that we both thought about in different ways following that conversation.
You know, I think I tried to, at a different time, and you're so right about social media. I mean, we didn't have it, and that's just fine.
Yes, you're very right.
But I tried to use the fact that I was Jewish to expose the community to Judaism. When we used to have a Sunday magazine section in the Courier Journal, they did a whole thing on me as before I was mayor, coming into being mayor, and they came out to my sister's home and my brother-in-law, and they did a cover with a picture of us, because every Friday night we had Shabbos dinner together with the family and my folks, and we also, you know, when I became mayor, all the other mayors for many, many years had a Catholic mass, red cap mass, before they were sworn in. So they would go to the cathedral, then they would walk to wherever, from there to wherever the inauguration was going to, or the swearing in was going to take place at the old city hall. And so they had always gone there. And so here I was, the first Jewish guy, and the question is, what do I do? Well, we came here. We had that Shabbos service here.
Wow.
And I can remember standing at that door over there. I can remember the guy who ended up being very helpful to me in the administration. He walked to the door and then he stopped. And I said, Charles, it's okay, you can come in. And he said, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm sure. And he was, you know, probably a 40-year-old man. And he jumped both feet into the synagogue, and he looked around and said, well, you didn't turn to salt, so everything's looking good. So I just tried as best I could to make sure folks understood that I was Jewish, what that meant to be Jewish, the traditions of Judaism. So obviously my staff, you know, learned, because I wasn't there for Rosh Hashanah and I wasn't there for Yom Kippur. But, you know, I chaired the Federation campaign one year, co-chaired it with a guy named Mason Rodal, and we had our Federation campaign meetings in the mayor's office. And one of my staff, Maura Temis, was on the CRC committee, the Community Relations Committee, and they used the conference room in the mayor's office for their meetings. So we exposed a lot of people who were in that area to the fact that this is what Judaism is about. These are the holidays. These are the kinds of social and philanthropic activities we're involved in, etc. So I guess I took it more as my opportunity to sort of spread the word.
So speaking of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which you just mentioned, this podcast episode is going to be for Tishrei, the month when we have the high holidays, when we have all these things. So clearly you two both grew up sitting in the chatty section here at Knesset Israel. But do you have any high holiday memories that stick out, whether they're in the sanctuary or, you know, you always used to go to someone's house for lunch or different things? Is there some memory of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur that when you hear about those holidays that sticks out?
Well, I go back again a little further than the mayor. In the late 50s and 60s, when we were down on Floyd Street, on Jacob Street, when we would get to the point to have the prayers for those who had died, the Yizkor. All the kids would run out the front door, and we would all run down to the bowling alley, And we would meet the kids from Adat Shuren, whose synagogue was right around the corner.
So just to explain, the Yizkor prayer is a prayer, a memorial prayer that is said for those who have passed. And there's a tradition, or some would say a superstition, that if your parents have not passed, that you don't stay in the room for that. So it's a point in time at which during this high holiday service, when everyone is there, that all of the kids will often, or the vast majority of the kids will leave the room. And so you're saying you wouldn't just leave the room, you would
go to the
bowling
bowling alley.
alley.
And my father's grocery, my grandfather's grocery, was a block away. And so for the little kids in our family, and our friends' kids, Dad would open up the grocery, even on Yom Kippur, to give the kids something to eat, who weren't bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. Of course, if they were, you got to fast. So, those are the kind of stories, or in the days when we would leave our home on Winston for Yom Kippur, and we, along with a lot of members of this congregation, would stay at the hotel downtown for Yom Kippur. So
that you wouldn't drive
so that we would walk to shul and walk back. So those are the kinds of memories that, and back in those days, the World Series also generally was around that time. That's when people followed baseball, and you would walk out onto the steps of KI just to take a break, and this was after women moved from upstairs to downstairs.
That's a whole separate issue. We don't need to have that whole conversation.
And someone would have a transistor radio in their ear, and so who's winning the game, and Sandy Koufax isn't playing, he's not pitching because it's Yom Kippur and he's Jewish, and so those are the memories I have.
So two memories that first come to my mind thinking about the holidays. First, certainly revolve around food. And on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, we would always be at my mom's house and just, with the same exact menu for probably 25 years. I guess I will see in a couple of weeks here, but my guess is it's, probably going on 50 years at least for me, and I'll see that in a couple of weeks. But so certainly just about the enjoyment with being together for family, and friends came as well. The holiday meals were always something very special to me and still are to this day. And so good matzo ball soup, and I think it's more of a Passover food, but we still eat gefilte fish on the high holidays, but I don't know why, but so that was one thing. The other thing was along the lines of what Jerry was just talking about. I still don't know why. I'll have to ask him after this interview here. But I do remember on Yom Kippur, and after we would break, but we often came back for the meal services, and I was always trying to fast along with my parents around, whether it was before bar mitzvah, around that time. But those days get pretty long, depending on here in Louisville on the western edge of the Eastern time zone. And so oftentimes on Yom Kippur in the afternoon, for reasons I don't know, my dad and I would go look at cars. Now, he was never in the market for a car, but I guess it was just a good way to pass the time quickly when we left services before we came back from Mila, because we were getting hungry and cranky. So my memory is always looking at random cars that we were never going to buy for passing the time before we came back.
Or trying to watch Rabbi Poland look out the window for the first star. Let's find that frickin' star. Let's get this Neil going.
I was going to say, I'm sure if we asked you for one more memory, it would have been the brilliant sermons you heard from the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That was the next thing on the tip of your tongue.
That is correct.
Yeah, exactly. We work hard on this, but no, it's okay. It's okay.
So thinking about,
No, go ahead.
The high holiday season, we just started the month of Elul, right, which is the month that immediately precedes Tishrei, immediately precedes the high holiday season, the sort of intensity and climax of Rosh Hashanah. And it's the time when we start thinking about our personal tshuva, the reflection, introspection, the spiritual work that each of us needs to do really day in and day out. But we have a special opportunity at this time of year to engage a little bit more deeply, to pay a little bit closer attention to who we are, who we want to be, relationships that we want to repair in our lives. And I'm curious, how do you think about tshuva? And if there's anything right now top of mind, be it professionally, socially, culturally, or in your Jewish life, that you are working on? When you think about tshuva, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I would say that what's what I think about at this point, and what I think about every time I see their smiling faces, are my two grandchildren. And so when you have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and you look into their innocent eyes and their desire to engage, and you just want to be sure the world is as good as it could possibly be for them. And I think that's what my wife and I would say is of utmost importance at this point in our lives. I mean, he's still got a lot of things to do.
Yeah, and Mayor Greenberg, I just wanted to say that I was particularly impressed. Speaking of tshuva, one of the things about tshuva is this idea of, it's commonly translated as repentance almost. And I was at a meeting of an organization called Clout, where you actually vocalized an apology on behalf of the city. And I thought that one of the things that the rabbis say about tshuva, about this idea of repentance, is you have to do it vocally. You have to say specifically what you're apologizing for. And I was so impressed by the way that you stepped forward and took responsibility for something that didn't even happen while you were mayor, but that you delivered that sort of apology. So I'm curious if you could talk maybe a little bit about that and the idea behind that, and how you feel that perhaps allows the city to do some of that work of tshuva, of trying to come back and be better.
Yeah, I think it's very important to deal with reality. And too often people in leadership positions try to spin things a different way, or try to lead with either misdirections or just overwhelming force or whatever it is. But particularly when you're dealing with the issues of racism in our community, and when you're dealing with the issues of how certain people have been treated by the police over generations, not just in our city, but in others, I thought it was very important to just deal with reality. If we're ever going to truly try to have trust in the police department by every member of the community, regardless of the circumstances they were born into, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their socioeconomic status, I think you need to deal with reality and acknowledge that people have been harmed. And so for me, it might not have been something that had happened before, but it actually was not a difficult decision for me. What is more difficult is the work to actually now build those bridges, do the work of repairing the trust, hiring people who agree with you, and then when things happen, particularly when it comes to policing, when things happen that you wish would not have happened, either by accident or for a very bad decision, is to deal with those things in real time with speed, and just to be transparent and honest with people. And you hope that by having the right people on your team, that we will get to a place in our city where our police department is truly respected and trusted by all. I have no doubt that the overwhelming majority of people in Louisville respect police officers. They want a vibrant, active, larger police department that focuses on community policing, which is engaging with religious leaders, small business owners, neighborhood leaders, formerly incarcerated individuals, to really work on preventing crime from happening in the first place, not just responding to crime. And I also firmly believe that the vast majority of those on LMPD and in law enforcement in general are in that line of work for the right reason. They want to serve. They want to protect others. They're not doing it to get rich or for any other reason. But there have been some really bad incidents in our city and in other cities, and so that's a high hurdle. And so we need to work hard every day to get to the place that I know we will get to. And I'm hopeful and optimistic with our new chief of police, with some folks that she's put in positions, with other people in our administration, by working with leaders of the Black community, of parts of our city that, again, we've talked about already today, that have been discriminated against for generations, and bringing them together. I think we'll get there.
Thank you. Just to check in, Laura, do we have people who've written questions yet? Or has anyone written questions that they handed in? No? Okay, so what we're going to do here... What?
I have not seen any hands.
You haven't seen any hands yet. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to transfer to a little bit of a lightning round, where we're going to ask some very quick questions of y'all that we're just expecting quick answers from. And while we're doing that, if you have any questions in the audience, if you want to write them down and just hold up the index card, we have some folks who can come around and take those. So these are our lightning round questions. We're going to ask them to every guest that we have on the show. So we'll see what your answers are. So first is your favorite Jewish holiday. It's a lightning round.
Lag BaOmer.
Lag BaOmer. Whoa! Out of left field. All right, and?
Well, if I'm going to go that direction, I'll say Shavuot, but
Oh boy.
I would say Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. All right, and keep listening to the podcast, and eventually you'll learn what Lag BaOmer is.
Okay, honey cake or apples and honey?
Absolutely apples and honey.
Apples and honey.
Ooh, all right.
Correct answer.
Best Purim costume you ever wore.
That's. I honestly don't remember dressing up for
Well,
Purim that much.
we had downtown at the show, we had Purim carnivals, and we had Purim dress competition, but I just don't remember what
I mean, my most vivid Purim memory is having those groggers, and inevitably they would not work. And then trying to figure out how to get those things to work when you know there's only one direction. All you got to do is spin.
All right, we'll give you a pass on that.
Okay.
Okay, best breakfast food. Yom Kippur breakfast.
For me, it's a chocolate cake.
Ooh.
It's lots of bagels.
There you go. Both good answers. Savory and sweet. There's debate there. All right, favorite biblical character.
Moses.
Noah.
Ooh, okay.
And our final lightning round question, Hamantashen or latkes?
Hamantashen.
Yeah, I do hamantashen too.
Ooh, all right, double hamantashen. Fascinating. All right, we have a question here from the kahal, from the crowd. This is for you, Jerry. Is it true that Thunder was once postponed 1 week because of Passover? Did you ever postpone Thunder over Louisville due to the Jewish holiday of Passover?
You know, as best I remember, somebody called, help me on this, dear. Somebody called you or me when I was mayor and said, we're looking at the schedule and Passover is, and Thunder is on Passover. Is that a problem? And we said, that's a problem. So yeah, I think, is that right? Yeah, good. She gave me thumbs up.
I will tell you that it's a very interesting question because literally, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this publicly or not, but this is off the record, right?
You are on a podcast.
I'm kidding. No, literally last week I was meeting with the Kentucky Derby Festival, and not in 2024, but in 2025, 2 weeks before Derby is Easter weekend. The military does not do air shows over Easter weekend. And the weekend before that, Saturday night, is the first night of Passover.
Ooh.
So that is a 2025 issue that has been flagged with no resolution at this point.
All right. We have.
It must happen once every 27 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. It revolves in that way. I think 19 years. I don't know. Our next episode, or one of the episodes, is going to be about how the Jewish calendar gets calculated, which is a whole. Yeah. So we have a question here that I think is interesting. We asked a bit how your Judaism has affected the way you approach being mayor, but we have a question here of how does your career choice affect your Judaism, affect your Jewish practice? Do you find that being mayor or any of the other careers that you've held have affected your ability to get to synagogue as much as you want, or otherwise affected your way of being Jewish?
Well, my mom knows the answer to this question.
She probably knows the answers to most questions.
Yeah, I would say my synagogue time has decreased dramatically. I'm not saying it was at the highest all-time point before I started my campaign for mayor either, but certainly my synagogue time and my time spent praying and actively involved in the Jewish community may have decreased since I started this career path of public service, but my connection to Judaism has only strengthened.
And I would say, looking back when I was mayor, that my faith increased because I generally went to a church every Sunday somewhere in the community, and the energy at a church service, especially an African American church service, is one that I'll never forget. My father, all of a sudden, we came out of Cable Baptist Church after a 3-hour service where we sang and we danced, and it was just incredible. And my dad said, you know, if we could do that at KI, we'd probably get a lot more people.
I agree, Jerry. I mean, I have thought that for the past 2.5 years. I've been meaning to talk to rabbis around town about that. But, I mean, particularly with the way the world is changing, with the way the kids are changing, there is something truly inspirational about the way that black churches conduct their services that is very, very engaging. And I do think there is something to take from their approach to services. Now, they also are seeing tremendous declines in attendance, particularly post-COVID, but there is something to take from that.
Yeah.
I feel honored and a little bit silly to be asking this question as a Lexingtonian, but what are the best bagels in Louisville, and why is it Cold Smoke? I don't know what that means.
Cold Smoke is the place where the best bagels in Louisville are. That's the answer to the question.
I agree.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks. To get the best bagels in Louisville, Cold Smoke Bagel. They're not even sponsoring our show, and we're giving them this free advertisement.
Next time.
They should, yeah. Sponsorship opportunity, right there.
But Zadie sandwich is still the best.
Ooh.
Especially for a Zadie.
All right, well, we are getting close to time, and we want to be respectful of y'all's time. So one of the things that, besides the lightning round that we're going to do every episode, is we're going to offer a l'chaim of the month. So we have to shout out to Heaven Hill Distilleries for supplying the l'chaims of the month. And you'll be hearing from the folks at Heaven Hill in a later podcast episode. There's a really amazing Jewish connection and Jewish family to the bourbon industry that really runs through Heaven Hill. They're really amazing, and we will talk with them in a future episode. But we want to ask y'all, if you want a l'chaim, l'chaim literally means to life. It's a Jewish way of saying cheers. But you not only say cheers, but you kind of say cheers to someone or to something. You can.
It's a chance to lift your glass to someone.
Yeah, to lift your glass, to honor someone. And so I don't want to speak for Rabbi Abramowitz here, for Shani, but we spoke before this episode, and we said that we wanted to make our l'chaim of the month this month to Laura and to the LPM team for really helping us launch this podcast. This is something that when Shani and I both realized we were going to be in Kentucky, we said we should do stuff together. We should, do things in our synagogues. And they're like, we're kind of like an hour and a half apart. It's kind of hard to get people to go back and forth. But we said we should do a podcast. And the fact that the folks at Louisville Public Media have trusted us and have helped support us and have really helped get this thing off the ground, we're so thankful. So our l'chaim of the month this month is going to go to the folks at LPM and the Podcast Hatchery. So l'chaim. Who are your l'chaims of the month to?
I'll give you the l'chaim of the month for me is to the Bluegrass Shmooze. This is great for our community, for our state.
My l'chaim of the month is to my two sons, Daniel and Benjamin, who in 48 hours are going off to college. My youngest son, Ben, will become a freshman. My son, Daniel, is a junior. They'll be in college together. And so my l'chaim to the month is to them, their future, and to all of
and to them and to all the college students, we say l'chaim responsibly. And we hope that they will have a really, really wonderful experience there. And we know you're itching to get to them and to spend time with family before they leave. So I just want to say thank you so much to Mayor Greenberg, to Mayor for Life, Abramson. It's been just an absolute honor and a thrill to be up here with y'all and to have this event. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
And thank you all for coming. There is, as Laura said, there's going to be dessert, schmooze, and if you want to hang out for just a second, we're actually going to play. There's a song written by a musician named Dan Byrne that he would play in bars, but he never recorded. And one of my cross the street neighbors has a bluegrass jam, and she had a friend there who told me about this song, and I found out about it. It's called Jew from Kentucky, and so it is going to be. I should note, he is not a Jew from Kentucky. He's a Jew from California, but he wrote this song, Jew from Kentucky, and he, for the first time, recorded it for us. Along with local musician Bridget Kalin, who's also a member of the Louisville Jewish community. And so as a debut, we're going to share with you Jew from Kentucky by Dan Byrne, and then we'll be heading out for the Shmooze and the Nosh. So thank you all again so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Listen to Jew from Kentucky, go out, grab some dessert nosh, and have a wonderful evening.